I built a garden gate out of white oak 11 years ago, pinned it with stainless steel screws, and told my wife it would outlast the fence. Last spring, the bottom rail split clean along a screw line, and I stood there in the yard feeling like a fraud. That night, I pulled out photographs of a 1,000-year-old Viking longship, and something stopped me cold. Those ships crossed open ocean with no glue, no screws, and no steel frame. They always looked crude and simple to me. At least, that is what I believed. So I went looking, and not in a book this time, but in the wood itself. In the yards along the Essex coast, where old boys still fare a plank by eye, and in the great museum at Roskilde in Denmark, where they have raised real longships out of the seabed and set them back together. What I found was not one clever trick. It was 20 of them, stacked one on top of another, each one quietly covering the weakness of the last. 20 small decisions that turned a thin skin of oak into something the North Sea could not break. Let me walk you through every single one. Number 1. We start where the Vikings started, with the skin of the boat. On a longship, the planks do not sit edge to edge the way the boards on a modern deck do. Each plank overlaps the one below it, like the clapboards running down the side of an old barn. Shipwrights call this clinker, or lapstrake, and it is the whole reason the hull is so strong for its weight. An overlapped seam is a double thickness of oak running the entire length of the boat. It stiffens the shell without adding a single frame. Run your hand down the side of the Gokstad ship, and you feel it, ridge after ridge, like the muscle down a horse's flank. Number 2. Overlapping the planks is only half the job. You have to hold that overlap shut, and hold it shut against an ocean. The Vikings did it with iron rivets, thousands of them, driven through both planks and clenched over a small square iron washer on the inside called a rove. You hammer the tail of the rivet down over that rove until the two planks are drawn tight as a drumhead. That is your clamp. And here is the part I love. Iron rusts, and as it rusts, it swells ever so slightly inside the oak, which only locks the seam tighter as the years pass. The boat grows more watertight with age, not less. Number 3 is not a part at all. It is a way of thinking, and it turns everything most of us were taught upside down. A modern boat is built skeleton first. You raise the ribs, then you skin them. The Vikings did the exact opposite. They built the shell of planks first, shaping the hull by eye and by feel, and only afterward fitted the frames inside. Shipwrights call this shell-first construction. It means the wood decides the shape, not a drawing on a wall. One of the old boys in the Essex yard told me, "You cannot fare a hull on paper, you fare it with your hands." Once you have watched a wet plank find its own honest curve, you understand exactly what he meant. Number 4 answers the question you should be asking. Why build the shell first? Because it lets the boat do the one thing that keeps it alive. It flexes. A rigid hull fights the sea, and anything that fights the sea for long enough eventually loses to it. A longship does not fight. It twists and works with every wave, the planks sliding against one another just enough to spill the load. Sailors on the old crossings said you could watch the deck ripple under your own feet in a heavy swell. That movement is not a flaw to be corrected. It is the whole design. A stiff boat cracks. A supple one comes home. Number 5. Every one of those flexing planks needs a spine to grow from, and that is the keel. On a longship, the keel is a single, long timber of oak, and in cross-section, it is shaped like a shallow letter T. That T shape does 2 jobs at once. The tall part gives the boat a deep backbone that keeps it from sliding sideways across the water, and the wide foot gives the garboards, the first planks, either side of the keel, a broad shoulder to land against. One timber, shaped with a hand axe, doing the work we now hand to a steel frame. Trust the wood. Number 6 is where the woodworker in you leans forward. The Vikings did not saw their planks, they split them. They took a straight length of oak and cleaved it out from the center, like slices from a pie, following the grain rather than cutting across it. This is called riving, and a riven plank is far stronger than a sawn one, because the grain runs unbroken from one end to the other instead of running off the edge partway along. A sawn board has short grain that wants to split. A riven board, the sea cannot easily tear. I taught myself to rive green oak a few years back. and the first time, a board opened clean along its own grain with a sound like tearing cloth. I finally understood why they never once reached for a saw. Number 7 follows straight from that. Because they rived along the grain, they could work the oak thin, shockingly thin. On some of these ships, the planks are barely as thick as your thumb. Try that with a sawn board, and it snaps in the first hard season. But a riven plank that thin is still strong, and thin planks mean a light boat. A light boat sits higher on the water, sails faster, and takes fewer men to move. Every ounce they shaved off the hull was an ounce the sea no longer had to lift. That is the quiet genius of it, and most people miss it entirely. Number 8 is the one modern shops have forgotten most completely. The Vikings worked their oak green while it was still wet from the standing tree. Green oak cuts like cheese under a sharp axe and bends into a curve that seasoned, dry timber would simply refuse. Then, as the finished hull slowly dried out, the planks shrank a touch and gripped their rivets even harder. Wood is what we call hygroscopic, meaning it drinks in moisture and gives it back with the weather, swelling and shrinking as it breathes through the seasons. The Vikings did not fight that movement. They built the boat around it. And this one idea, working with the wood's own movement instead of against it, is the thing I most wish I had understood before I ever drove a screw into anything. Before we go further, I want to tell you where all of this lives in one place. I gathered these methods into a book called Secrets of the Shipyard, 150 pages on wooden treenails that tighten as they age, and watertight joints that hold without a single drop of glue. If you build things meant to outlast you, the link in the description will take you straight to it. Number 9 picks up right where we left off, because I said the frames go in after the shell, and now I want to show you how they held them. On the oldest and finest ships, the lower ribs were not nailed down rigidly to the planks at all. They were lashed. When the shipwright rived each plank, he left small raised cleats standing proud on the inner face, drilled them, and tied the ribs to the hull with spruce root or strips of whale-baleen. A lashed frame can move. It flexes along with the plank rather than pinning it stiff, which carries us right back to that living, working hull. A rigid fastening in that spot would have shaken the boat to pieces inside a season. Number 10 sits in the belly of the boat and quietly carries the whole force of the wind. When you step a tall mast onto a thin hull, every bit of the sail's push wants to punch that mast straight down through the bottom planks. So the Vikings laid a heavy timber over the keel, called the keelson, and set into it a great carved block of oak to cradle the base of the mast. On the Oseberg ship, this block is so large, the crew nicknamed it the Old Woman. It spreads the push of the mast across many frames at once, so no single plank ever takes the blow alone. Load shared is load survived. Number 11 changed the map of the whole medieval world. A longship draws almost no water. Fully loaded with men and cargo, the hull still sits so shallow it needs barely the depth of a man's knee to float. That shallow draft meant the Vikings did not need a harbor, a dock, or a deep channel. They ran the bow straight up onto any beach, any mud flat, any gravel bank, and stepped off dry-shod. And it meant they could push up rivers no deep-hulled ship could ever follow, striking far inland where nobody believed the sea could reach. A boat that goes where boats cannot go is a boat that writes history. Number 12 is so simple it almost feels like cheating. Look down at a longship from above, and you cannot tell the bow from the stern. Both ends rise into the same graceful point. The hull is perfectly symmetrical end to end, which means the boat can run backward as easily as forward. Caught in a narrow fjord with rocks ahead and no room to swing around, the crew did not turn. They simply started pulling the other way, and the stern became the bow. Think about that for a second. No wasted motion, no dangerous turn in tight water. The boat was built to reverse straight out of trouble. Number 13 comes from that symmetry. Because both ends looked alike, the Vikings needed one fixed place to steer from, and so they hung a broad steering oar on the right-hand side near the stern. They called it the steerboard. Say that word slowly, and you will hear a word we all still use today, starboard, the right-hand side of any vessel afloat, from a canoe to a container ship. That single oar, mounted on a pivot, could be feathered and turned with one hand. A whole ship answered to a fisherman's wrist. Every time you hear the word starboard, you are hearing a Viking shipwright speak across 1,000 years. Number 14 is the engine of the whole thing, and here is what most people get wrong about it. That single square sail was not linen and it was not cotton. It was wool, woven tight and then worked over with grease and tallow until it could hold a full belly of wind and shed the rain at the same time. A good sail took one flock of sheep years to grow and a household most of a winter to weave. It was worth as much as the boat hanging underneath it. One sail, one mast, and the entire North Atlantic suddenly within reach. Number 15 is the backup that never once failed them, because wind does not always blow, and it almost never blows the way you want. Oars. A long row of them down each side, worked through neat round holes in the upper planks that could be plugged and sealed watertight when the ship was under sail. Wind for the open crossing, muscle for the calm and the rivers and the careful work close to shore. A longship was never becalmed and never truly trapped. It always kept a second way home. Hold on to that idea of a second way home, because it is the thread running quietly through this entire boat. Number 16 is where the boat becomes watertight, and it is pure, patient craft. No matter how tightly you clench a seam, oak laid against oak will always weep a little. So the Vikings packed every seam, before ever closing it, with a rope of tarred wool, animal hair, and moss, all twisted together and pressed hard into the joint. Shipwrights call the place where two planks meet the faying surface, and packing that faying surface is what stops the sea from finding a way through. As the hull swelled with water, the wool in the seam swelled right along with it, so the joint grew tighter the longer the boat stayed afloat. The ocean, in a sense, sealed its own boat. Number 17 is the reason any of these ships lasted long enough for us to dig them back out of the mud. Once the hull was planked and caulked, the Vikings coated the whole thing, inside and out, in pine tar. Thick, black, sticky pine tar, cooked slowly down from resinous pine wood over a low fire until it ran like dark honey. That tar soaked deep into the grain and shut the door on the two things that kill any wooden boat, standing water and the rot that always follows it. They re-tarred the hull every single season, the way you or I might mean to oil a garden bench, except that they actually did it year after year. Preservation was never an afterthought for them. It was a yearly ritual. Number 18 is a shape your eye already loves without knowing why. Look at the profile of a longship, and the top edge sweeps upward at both ends in a long, low, patient curve. That curve is called the shear, and it is not there only for beauty. The low middle keeps the boat's weight down near the waterline where it belongs, so the hull sits steady and does not roll, while the rising ends throw off the big waves in a heavy sea before they can ever climb aboard. Low where it needs to be low, high where it needs to be high. 100 generations of sailors have called that line beautiful, and it turns out beauty and seaworthiness were the very same drawing all along. Number 19, you can carry straight into your own shop this year. No oak tree on earth grows long enough to make a full keel or a full plank in a single piece, so the Vikings joined their timber end to end with a scarf joint. Two long tapering cuts, lapped over one another and fastened, so the join ends up nearly as strong as solid wood. A well-cut scarf spreads the load across a long overlap instead of butting two ends together and simply hoping. Butt two boards end to end, and you have built in a weakness that is only waiting for its moment. Scarf them properly, and the join all but disappears into the grain. That one joint is worth the price of learning all on its own. Number 20 brings us home, and it ties every other detail together. The whole boat, for all its ocean-crossing strength, was still light enough to drag across dry land. When two rivers did not quite meet, the crew would run the longship up onto rollers of felled logs and haul it overland to the next stretch of water, sometimes for miles. A hull heavy enough to feel truly solid could never have done that. But every choice we have talked through, the riven planks, the thumb-thin oak, the flexing shell, the shared loads, all of it kept the boat light. And a boat you can pick up and carry is a boat that is never truly stuck. There it is again, that second way home. So, step back with me now and look at what we actually have. Not one miracle, 20 ordinary, sensible decisions, each one covering the weakness of the last. The overlapping planks made the shell strong. The rivets pulled it tight and tightened further with age. The riven oak made it strong and light at once. The flex let it survive the swell, and the tar and the wool kept the water out for a lifetime. Pull any single one of these choices out, and the boat gets worse. Stack all 20 together, and you get a hull that could cross an ocean, run up a river, reverse out of danger, be carried over dry land, and still be sitting whole in a museum in Roskilde 1,000 years later. That is what people really mean when they call these ships unsinkable. Not that the sea could never take one, because boats were lost, and good men went down with them. What they mean is that the design refused to keep a single point of failure. Every weakness had a partner standing behind it. And that, far more than any axe or any rivet, is the real secret of the Shipyard. I went back out to that garden gate of mine. I pulled every stainless screw, and I rebuilt it the old way, with riven oak pinned by wooden pegs that swell up tight in the rain, and joints cut to move with the seasons, instead of straining against them. It has stood through 3 hard winters now without a single crack. The fix for my very modern failure turned out to be 1,000 years old the whole time. We did not lose these methods because they stopped working. We lost them because they asked for patience, and most of us were simply in a hurry. If today changed how you look at a plain plank of oak, Secrets of the Shipyard goes further still. 16 chapters on old preservation with pitch, tallow, and linseed oil, on watertight faying without a drop of glue, and 3 full build projects you can start this weekend. Scan the QR code on screen to bring it home to your own shop. And if you want more of the old ways, subscribe to the Master Shipwright, where we build ocean-tested and made to last centuries.